Warning: the following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back, everybody. Season 4, Hot Takes with Billy Biz. It's the final season, which means we have a lot of big stuff left to get through. One of them being, I said last season when we did Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, that we would come back, we would do all the prequels. So we have 2 prequels we're going to have to get through before the end of the run of the show. And today, we are knocking out Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And joining me once again to talk Star Wars from Reboot It, he is the heart, the soul, the backbone, the people's champion, Ron Swallow.
Hello, how's it going?
It's so full disclosure, we are recording this on election day here in the States, and it's a tense day. It's a very tense day.
It is.
So it's kind of nice to be talking Star Wars.
Yeah, I watched it last night, and I'm still mad at you right now.
Well, it's interesting because it's like
I'm not that mad. That was comedy's sake right there.
It's jokes are the best when you explain them. I love it.
Yeah.
It's great because we are exchanging talking about real politics for space politics, because this movie is oddly about the tensions of an upcoming vote as well, which is kind of interesting.
It is. Yeah, that's funny. While I was watching it, I was going, oh man, like if you took out the love story, it's the story about how a guy gets to fascism.
I mean, that's essentially what the story of the prequels are. And I was texting a friend of the show and Force Center host, Ken Knapsack, while I was watching it. And I was like, I bet you someone much smarter than me has already come to this conclusion and written an article about it. But the one thing that kind of struck me while watching it this time was this was the first Star Wars movie that was post 9/11. It was not too long after. It was just, a handful of months. And what's interesting is this movie starts with a terrorist attack and it ends with essentially a president leading a country into a false war. And I just texted him and I was just like, this was written in 2000 and shot in 2001. Is corruption just so predictable that George Lucas was like, here's exactly how it's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, yes. It's history has shown us that what you do is you sow confusion, and when you sow enough confusion, someone just goes, can someone get control of this, and lets whatever control happens be the control that they deal with. And that's literally what happened. They're like, oh, we need to fight a war. I guess we'll go do that, even though he created the war.
And here we thought we were going to avoid politics for an hour. It's funny because everyone's like, oh, keep politics out of Star Wars. I'm like, Star Wars is about politics. It's about war. It's about rebels and authority. But let's take a step back for just a second. Let's talk about the film. Let's talk about kind of the let's get a little less meta and talk about just the nuts and bolts film. So let's go back in time. Let's go back to the winter, or I should say maybe the late fall, early winter of 2001. Now, hitting theaters around this time is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and Monsters, Inc. and Lord of the Rings. And while I was excited for at least one of those 3 at the time, I remember specifically going to Monsters, Inc. because what was really important to me was this was the first movie that had the teaser trailer for Star Wars Episode 2. I'm not sure if I knew it was called Attack of the Clones at this point. It was just Episode 2. And I remember that first teaser. I don't know if you remember it very well, but it is just, it's kind of flashes in and out of different very dramatic looking scenes from this movie set to the rhythm of the Darth Vader breathing. Do you remember that trailer?
I do. It was pretty freaky. It was good.
I thought this trailer, I actually think that's the best trailer of any of the Star Wars prequels, was this Episode 2 preview.
It was pretty great. I mean, Phantom Menace had that moment with the kid and the shadow. Well, they did that also in this movie as well, but where he looks like Darth Vader in the shadow or whatever. That one advertisement.
Right. The
That
poster.
was really dope.
Yeah,
The poster that was really dope. The preview of Phantom Menace was pretty good too. But yeah, I remember Attack of the Clones having a pretty solid preview. I was a little more down on Phantom Menace at that point. And so I had a little bit of expectations that Attack of the Clones wouldn't be great. But I still was also excited because it was Star Wars. I remember that.
I remember you said during Phantom Menace at that point you were still working at a movie theater. Were you still 3 years later at the same theater?
No, actually, at that point, I believe I was either about to move to LA or I was in LA. I honestly remember, but I feel like I was in LA at that point, and I was married.
Oh, so see, for me, I use Star Wars almost as like I base all my life events around when a Star Wars movie came out. So I remember it very well. I also remember, what's funny is I remember the backlash had, when Star Wars Episode 1 had come out, I think even if people were disappointed, it wasn't this immediate kind of like, oh, I hated it. Everyone, even the people that ended up hating it were kind of like, maybe I liked it. I don't know. I need to sit with it. I don't remember there being immediate backlash. Then I remember around 2001, Star Wars Episode 1 was the first Star Wars movie that they released on DVD. It was around the time that Attack of the Clones was about to come out. And that's when people started to voice like, I didn't like that one. But when this teaser came out and then the trailer came out around March, and it showed a lot of the Geonosis Arena stuff, I remember it was almost like people were like, they forgot that they were disappointed, or they put their disappointment aside for Episode 1. And I remember a huge sense of optimism going into this movie. Do you kind of remember May-ish of 2002 going into this?
I can say this, that I remember being in the theater more than I remember. And now that I'm thinking about it, I went and saw it with one of my best friends, Joseph West. So I was in Albuquerque. So I hadn't moved to LA at that point. Because we both got what I remember being pumped, and we're probably not getting to this point, but I remember being pumped up about fight scenes because I was a big Jackie Chan fan, and I just loved good fight scenes, and it was very exciting that we were going to get to see Jedi have good fight scenes, and that was the most exciting part for me. So I remember enjoying, like, expecting to see some pretty cool fight scenes, and I don't want to give it away, but there was a specific moment where the theater erupted when it happened. I don't know if we want to get to that point yet. Should I talk about it, or should we wait?
You know what? We're here. Let's just get into it.
Okay. Well, when Yoda pulls out his lightsaber,
absolutely.
As people
much as
went insane.
People now, I think, tend to think like, ugh, it looks so bad. It looks so dumb. It's so hokey. It's so silly. I cannot think, and I've seen every Star Wars movie in the theater with re-releases and whatnot. I can't think of a bigger reaction, not even Star Wars, even Avengers Endgame or Infinity War. I cannot think of a bigger reaction in a theater than opening night with Yoda and the lightsaber. And I don't care how big of a cynical person you are or what you think of it now. Like, you cannot deny that moment, everyone lost their minds.
The whole theater literally was like, just cheered. It was actually just like when Cap holds Thor's hammer up. It was
sure.
The exact same moment as far as I'm concerned. Like, it was, I remember watching that and going, people were literally freaking out. And look, I know a lot of people don't like that he was flipping all around, doing the fight or whatever, but I totally loved it. It reminded me again of sort of Batman style / a little Dragon Ball Z anime style to it as well.
It was a little like Mortal Kombat too. I feel like when I play a fighting game, I'm always jumping around. It's like, can't catch me, can't catch me. Look, I think, and I think that actually ties into kind of my overall thoughts on this movie, which is, I bet you a lot of people now, knowing my stance on a lot of this stuff, knowing, me going on Force Center podcast and talking like, ugh, he's just going to give this movie one big pass. I think that there are some fatal flaws in Attack of the Clones. I actually think probably more than any of the other Star Wars movies, period. There's just some like woof. But I do think that there's so much good stuff in here. It's a little bit of the baby in the bathwater, and I know you kind of have to wade through that bathwater to find it. But we're gonna talk about a lot of this stuff, and I want to start with kind of the topic of the hour, which we talked about was the politics of Star Wars, which to me I always kind of find fascinating because when we started with Star Wars, we started, you know, the Great War, the Great Conflict, it had already happened. The bad guys had already won by the time that we start Episode 4. So a lot, you know, when we, you know, spiritually as a community first saw Star Wars, the bad guys had already won. It was now, you know, we needed 3 movies to get rid of the bad guys. I always thought it was interesting, well, how did we get there? And I really like Attack of the Clones. Even though it's small and it's not in there a lot, I really do like this kind of idea of like, all right, what does it look like with the roles of the Jedi in this society? And I love this idea that, you know, the Jedi are kind of like these police officers almost. And they're like, look, if you want to start a war, you can't expect it to be on us.
Yeah. I guess that is kind of what they were doing, because they were supposed to be like peace officers, and they're like, well, we don't want to fight a war. You know, I guess.
Which they end up doing anyway. Right.
Yeah. I just remember like at one point, you know, Yoda's like telling them to blow up a ship, and I'm thinking about like Obi-Wan's reaction to all the people dying on the planet at the same time when Alderaan is blown up.
Right.
And I'm just thinking about all those Jedi having to feel the deaths of the people inside of that ship. Although I guess some of that ship was robots or whatever.
Mostly robots. I think they were wise in this, even though, you know, there's the banking clan and the mining guild, they all kind of joined the separatist movement. It's almost all droids that end up being kind of their, but you know, it's the clones definitely take some hits in this. I mean, Jedi, good Lord. The Jedi, let's start kind of at the most important part of this, which is the whole third act of this movie. I don't know how people can be like, I can't watch this. I skipped this one. It's like, well, when I was a kid, before there was ever a thought of a prequel, oh my God, I used to think like, dude, if Luke is the last Jedi and he can do all this crazy like flips and stuff and move things with his mind, what was it like when the Jedi were like kicking it for reals? And like to see that massive battle with so many Jedi, that's kind of peak Star Wars for me.
I mean, part of that was very fun for me. Mace Windu's all of Mace Windu's moments were sick. And just a big crowd of Jedi blocking lightsabers and blocking blaster bolts. That was great. But like, I don't know.
I see the reservation in your face. Talk about where it's coming from, because I think that's where the meat of this conversation is really going to be.
I guess a big portion of it is just like, if this story, because that was the problem, is like, it was like they were trying to tell too many stories at a time. They're trying to talk about the fall of Anakin Skywalker, and I think that's what it's kind of supposed to be. Like the whole trilogy is supposed to be that, but it's also about the fall of democracy and the fall of, I mean, in theory, freedom, right?
Right.
And the rise of fascism. And so part of that is like, it's so cool to see all this great action that we got to see. And the other part of it is like, there's definitely like a moment where you go, oh, they're fighting for nothing right now. All these Jedi are dying for nothing. and look, I guess that's a good part of a movie if you really think about it. Like when you go deep on it, you go, okay, well, right now they're fighting a war that has just been started by the guy they're fighting the war for, and that stuff was great. I don't know, there was just a part of me that's like, the rush to him going, like, I guess the biggest problem with this whole thing is Anakin, and the love story and how he goes to the dark side in a weird way, because like, okay, like I get the mom moment, right? right? Like anybody who's ever loved their mom, if some group of weirdos kidnapped your mom and you had the power to kill most of them, you probably would. Maybe
Sure.
you wouldn't. Maybe you wouldn't kill the kids, but you'd definitely kill all the people who made that shit happen. Like,
not sure I gloat about it. If that makes any difference, you know?
Yeah. I don't know. That's my I don't know. You know, again, I know we were talking about the battle, and the battle I loved. Like, it looks great. It's fast. Seeing so many people do flips and use the force and things like that. But then also, like, there's a few things that, like, I guess part of it is I've read so many of the Star Wars novels, and you think about, like, them having to just kill those angry beast things that those people brought in to, you know, inside the arena to sort of like, I guess that was sort of Roman Colosseum.
Sure. Yeah.
Tribute type of thing. And having to kill those, it's almost like having to kill a lion for being a lion.
But okay, I hear you. This was actually my biggest complaint of the Jedi Fallen Order, the game that just came out like maybe a year ago. But if you look back into it, Star Wars, as much as it preaches peace and whatnot, they have no problem killing animals. They kill animals in every single Star Wars movie. The Wampa did nothing wrong. It was just being a Wampa. You know, The Rancor didn't know any better. He was just being a Rancor. Like, killing animals in Star Wars.
I don't know why.
Kind of its thing, you know?
Yeah, there was just that one scene where it's like when Obi-Wan chops off its leg and then slices it and then just like just a little fancy swirly thing and stabs him in the head. You're like, damn, they just like totally made that killing of that weird bug thing look real cool.
I mean, that's all of Jedi Fallen Order to me. So if you play that game, there's a lot of just like, dude, that monster over there is just chilling. It's just doing its own thing. And the game's like, no, you got to kill it. I'm like, I don't want to kill it. But you know, you brought up a good point. And I think it speaks to Attack of the Clones in general, which is something that I do think is problematic, which is, you know, you're like, this conversation is already starting off like in 4 different areas. And I think that's probably the biggest problem of Attack of the Clones as a movie, is that if you were to elevator pitch it and it's like, what is this movie about? You're right. It's about Anakin falling in love. It's about Anakin starting his descent into the dark side. It's about the Republic collapsing. It's about a war. Like, it's about 5 or 6 different things, each with 5 or 6 different levels of importance attached to them. Yeah. And I think in that regards, Attack of the Clones, even though it's up there as one of the longest Star Wars, I think Last Jedi maybe gets it by a minute or two. It almost feels rushed in a way because we're, you know, Count Dooku is our main villain of this film, and he does not show up until about an hour and 20 minutes into this movie, you know?
Yeah. And we don't have any background on Count Dooku either. He's just, we don't know how dangerous he is. We don't know why he's dangerous. We know basically that he was a student of Yoda at one point, I guess. We know I know more because...
Yeah. I mean, you and I, we both are Star Wars, you know, like I listened to the Dooku Jedi Lost audio drama, which is the history of Dooku. So yes, I'm bringing a lot into this that is not there, because all you hear at the beginning is, well, he can't be a murderer because he used to be a Jedi. And you're like, used to be a Jedi? What does that mean? And we never go back to that. It was even, there was a great deleted scene that they took out, and it was about the Lost 20, how he was the 20th Jedi in the history of the Jedi to ever leave. And they cut all that stuff out. So by the time that we get to him, he's just another guy that turned to the dark side of the Force, when really, you know, the backstory is very complicated. And I guess that's sort of a bummer. I could see both sides of it. It doesn't really, that would be just one more plot to add to this movie that we don't have time for. But at the same time, by the time he shows up in the movie, it almost feels like they thought they were building it up, but you're almost just like, wait, who is this guy? You know?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you get that he's dangerous pretty quick. He throws the lightning like Palpatine in the original Star Wars, which you're like, oh, cool. Seeing Yoda stop that was pretty dope. Like, that was.
I think that was the first time too that we realized, like, oh, if Luke hadn't thrown his lightsaber like a weenie, he probably could have deflected that lightning, because Obi-Wan just absorbs it like it's a mosquito trap.
Yeah. So that was also cool. Like all of that stuff was great, and the fight scene that fight scene was sick. I mean, and you get to see Anakin being impulsive like a maniac, and getting his arm chopped off. Sweet.
I remember there
Darth
was
Vader.
There was a lot of criticism of that, because it's like you come off arguably the greatest lightsaber duel in any Star Wars movie, which was the Phantom Menace kind of 3-way lightsaber duel. And they shot all this one pretty much in close up, which in retrospect, like, I think it looks pretty cool,
Yeah.
But, I think that criticism is kind of null and void, because obviously, once you get 5 minutes later past that scene, you realize, well, that lightsaber duel had to be less cool, because then the impact of Yoda scene doesn't work if they had just this amazing choreographed thing. So I always kind of threw that criticism out the window.
Well, yeah, and also you have to sell Count Dooku as pretty amazing, right? So he takes out Obi-Wan and Anakin, who is possibly the most gifted Jedi of all time, in the blink of an eye. So he's badass that way. And then Yoda comes in, and it makes so this is how badass Yoda is once you go to that. But it was such like I said, this is my problem with this movie. It's like there's these parts that I really enjoy. I actually really enjoy the funny banter between Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy that a lot. I enjoyed the funny banter between Anakin and Padme when they actually had it. Like, that stuff was fun. I also I enjoyed all the fight scenes. I enjoyed that chase scene. I enjoyed the mystery at the beginning of who was trying to kill. But again, the whole movie could have been the mystery of who's trying to kill Padme. The whole movie could have been the mystery of him finding his mom. And that would have made his descent into being the dark side even better, right? If you'd just taken one whole movie to show him searching for his mom, and each time he gets close to finding his mom, something gets in the way, and he has to do something that pushes him a little beyond the boundaries that he would normally not want to be at, or whatever, so that you see his descent into darkness as like a slow step process, trying to save the one thing that they mentioned at the beginning of Phantom Menace, is that he missed his mom. So if you use that whole thing to show his descent towards darkness, his mom gets killed, that makes him go crazy for a minute. And then if the love story was actually earned, where maybe Padme's on this journey with him the whole time as a friend, and they get closer and closer slowly, I don't know, there's this story that could have happened and should have been a movie that would have made sense. And then another movie would have made sense to have the whole spy plot, the Jango Fett being part of it would be maybe the next movie after that. Just like we said, there's just too many things in this movie for me to make me actually like it overall.
I mean, if anything, that's almost a criticism of Phantom Menace, because it's look, true. You only have 3 movies. And in that sense, it's well, Phantom Menace really spun its wheels then, if we ended up where we ended up, because that's almost where you should have started. I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what you just said, because as I was listening to you, I thought, what would have made this so much easier is if they had lowered that age gap between Anakin and Padme in the first one, and that they could sort of start to bond a little bit more romantically there. Either age him up just a little bit, I don't know, something. Because the problem with Attack of the Clones, and why I feel like the love story is tough, is because she rejects him, and he has to kind of win her over, plus deal with the stuff with his mom. So imagine if he had kind of won her over, and that wasn't necessarily something that had to be dealt with in this movie. Their love was already budding from the start. If she actually liked him from the start of this movie, and then
it would make sense. Yeah.
Then the mother thing comes, because the truth of the matter is, even if it's not the story that we would have told ourselves. The story is supposed to be that Anakin loves Padme so much. He loves her just as much as he loves his mother, and he loses his mother, and he's like, never again, because if it's even possible, I love this woman even more than I loved my mother, and I can't feel that way again. But again, like, that whole thing has to get crammed into this one movie, and that is one of 3 different stories, because we're also dealing with what is happening with Kamino and these cloners, and then the C story, which is granted it's small, but it's still very important, is the vote on this army, and also kind of Palpatine's slow influence. So you're right. The focus on this is shifted. So my approach to Attack of the Clones is, again, like I said, there are fatal flaws to this movie. I think that is one of them. So it's like, okay, let's look at the parts that we do have. Does the good outweigh the bad? And I do think that second narrative, which is Obi-Wan's kind of investigation into Kamino,
I love that part.
I really love all of that. And I really don't know anyone that doesn't like this movie, but doesn't praise at least that storyline.
Well, I mean, I love the part where he goes into the diner and he talking to that dude. And obviously the CG is a little, old or whatever.
The CG's rough.
Yeah. But I'll put that aside and say that I loved that whole interaction, because that's Obi-Wan. He's the guy who knows a dude at the diner because he's a Jedi of the people. Like, that's one of the things I love that they kind of made with Obi-Wan, is he's the guy who can go in, talk to people who are regular, find out the information that needs to be found, and then actually go, like, investigate a thing. And I loved the whole way that happened. And there was still mystery that they barely even answered. Sifo-Dyas went and did this. Tyrannus, who's Tyrannus? Like, we eventually find out sort of that stuff. Again, this is one of those things where we've read all the in-between things, so we actually know that stuff. But it's like, I don't know, there were all these hints of cool mystery that never got answered, and I think that's what happened. I think the biggest problem was that as a trilogy, this whole thing was too massive to do right. And I think once all 3 came out, people were like, "What? This is a mess." And I think that's why they get looked bad so much, because people forgot about the good stuff and think about how much of a mess it was to get to where they got to. Like, okay, and the other thing is, look, I know we're not completely talking crap, and yes, I do love that whole mystery part. And if the whole movie, if the whole movie had been that mystery, or a whole movie had been put to Anakin going to the dark side, all that stuff, I would love that. Like the solving the clone thing, and then it makes sense that the clone army's for the Jedi, and they're like, yeah, we made this for you guys. You guys asked us to do it. When are you here to pick them up? Like, that whole thing is interesting. And where did it come from? And then they're in a bad position. They need an army, and there's an army available for them. Even though the mystery is like who actually made the army, doesn't matter at that point. You need the army, so you grab the army. Like, all that stuff sort of makes sense, right? But like, Anakin being a weird mega stalker, and
that's
all of the I'm in pain every time I'm near you. It's agony. Like, look, I've had some crushes on some girls, and I'm not gonna pretend that it wasn't like uncomfortable, but I certainly wasn't saying it like that, because I'm not a creeper.
Please, I love how he's like, please tell me if you're suffering as much as I am. It's like, I am actually.
Yeah,
watching
I'm
this.
suffering right now.
I did think, one thing I want to, before we talk about Anakin's really poor dialogue, because I have a theory on that too.
Oh, okay.
But Attack of the Clones, I remember when they announced that title, people didn't like it, and then they saw the movie and they're like, that title doesn't fit at all. It fits better with the third one than the second one.
Yeah.
But I was really thinking about Attack of the Clones. Why would he call it Attack of the Clones? And then I started to think, what's really interesting about this movie, and it's interesting in hindsight of having seen the whole, trilogy now. This is the movie where the Jedi lose. If you were to go back and look and be like, how did the Jedi, from Order 66, how did they lose? It's like they lost what should be the big heroic moment of this film, which is the Jedi think that it's over, they're surrounded, and then Yoda comes with a bunch of clones, and it's this big cheering, yeah, moment. That is the moment that the Jedi lost. Because the attack of the clones is they're a Trojan horse. Yeah. They were built by Palpatine to take them out. And the fact that they just so willy-nilly just accept this army that was created under false pretenses, but still decide to lead them and to use them, that is when the Jedi truly lose. And so the attack is very inwards. The clones attack them by embedding themselves into kind of the Jedi's philosophies of how to win this war. And then they end up being the ones that ironically take them all out. So I actually think the title works in that sense. It didn't make sense at the time, but I do think it works now.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the title. I even then I didn't. And let me tell you, I know I left that movie happy. Let me say that. As much as there's things that annoy me about that movie, the fight, again, I will say maybe it's because I was a kid and I just loved all the fight scenes. But the second Yoda came out, I forgot about everything else that annoyed me. If it even annoyed me at the moment, except for me going, like, I do remember watching it going, wow, this is weird. That dialogue is weird. But other than that, like that fight scene at the end made it so that I was like, okay, cool. I don't really care. I'm super joyous right now. So.
There's a lot of scenes in here that I think, like, when I think of my favorite battles or something of Star Wars, because also, first of all, to my knowledge, maybe Last Jedi you could make the argument, but this is really the only time that we see Obi-Wan doesn't have his lightsaber and he hand-to-hand fights Jango Fett, gives him a headbutt, a kick, like Jedi's doing fisticuff fighting, like that doesn't happen, and this is the only time, and it's pretty cool.
It is. It's great. They have that one kick that he does where he catches him out of the air. That thing is great. He does a from the ground kick too. I mean, like it was a great fight scene. That whole thing, and also it sold me a little bit on Boba Fett too, like because you're like, this is his dad. Oh, Boba Fett's dad is a Mandalorian, and also if you know about Mandalorians, they were kind of like experts at fighting people who had the Force, and so like. Literally, the Emperor was like, oh, well, I'm just going to make an army of people who were experts at fighting the Force.
That's why I love the look of the clone army, because it's like half Stormtrooper, half Mandalorian armor. Like, that is awesome. And I will say, the sequence that immediately follows it, in my opinion, is the second best Star Wars space battle in any of the movies. First being the Death Star trench run. That's untouchable.
I don't know if it gets better than that.
But the second one being this movie I remember when the sonic blast hit the rock, the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, something's wrong with the, like the fact that they take all the sound out and then it becomes this all-encompassing wave of sound is the coolest thing to me in this whole movie.
Yeah, that was those were really good moments. And Obi-Wan hating to fly, hilarious.
Yeah, so I do want to touch upon we talked about Anakin and some of the cringe that he has to say, and sometimes it's not even what he has to say because it's bad. But Natalie Portman and Ewan McGregor have terrible dialogue that you're just like, sure, they're good enough. Why is this guy? And we were watching it over the weekend, and my wife was like, is English not his first language? It feels like someone who doesn't quite like his cadence doesn't quite have, like someone who doesn't quite have the grasp of this language. And then I thought to myself, and maybe I'm totally giving him the benefit of the doubt, I could be wrong, but when Anakin talks, he talks very deliberately and almost as if he's like, excuse me, my lady, I'm just like, why are you so slow at talking? And I almost wonder if Hayden Christensen was like, well, if I talk normal, if I talk this fast, it doesn't make sense how Anakin would then turn into Darth Vader, and Darth Vader is very deliberate and pronounced and takes his time and very powerful. So maybe his thought was like, I'll start to mimic that cadence and speech pattern now. So it's a gradual transition with the helmet, but I'm really grasping at straws. It's either that or like he just literally doesn't know this language very well, because there are times where he says he proclaims something, but he almost puts like a question mark at the end of it. Like it's really bad in Revenge of the Sith when he's like, "You turned her against me," and it's like, is that a question? Are you asking him if he did that?
Oh, I wonder if like, like some people when they get mad they sound whiny.
Sure.
And I just wonder if like people told him like, okay, well, you have to basically have an underlying anger all of the time. Like if you and he thought, and he maybe is a guy who thinks being angry sounds whiny. I don't know any other explanation, because basically he just sounded whiny while angry. And you're right. It was like he didn't quite understand what he was supposed to be saying. I don't know. But also, I just don't think it helps that the dialogue was that bad. Because
I do think that there are a handful.
He did have the worst.
There are a handful of moments where he actually does nail it. The one that really pops into my mind is when he's explaining to Padme on that kind of refugee frigate about the Jedi and how they're encouraged to love. Like he's very soft spoken, but he sounds convincing, and I was like, that's great. But then the next thing is like, "Excuse me, my lady, I'm in charge of security." Like I felt like I was at a 6th grade play again. It's like, I don't understand how someone can the scene before he's great, the scene after he's horrible, and then like when he tells Padme how he killed the Tusken Raiders, I thought that was great. Like that scene was really important, and he nails that scene. But that's like one of the only scenes that he nails in this movie.
Yeah. I as a rule, I tend to not like blame actors too much unless it's been so obvious that they've been bad in so many films that I can't deny their badness. And especially when dialogue is written so badly. But you're right. When I think about it, everybody else who was in this film took dialogue that wasn't great and made it palatable. Like even the guy who played Emperor Palpatine, like he has a bunch of lines in there that were like pretty cheesy, and like him trying to hide that he's the bad guy, I think you could become invincible at one point, or like he's describing what Anakin is going to be once he throws off the bonds of the Jedi, basically, but he doesn't say it exactly like that.
Right.
That whole dialogue is like super creepy and weird. And he made it sound like that's just what that guy was saying.
Actually, there's one other actor in these prequels that I think rivals Hayden Christensen for worst acted.
Oh.
And I get hate for it because people love him, but I think Samuel L. Jackson is a fantastic actor who, for some reason, is so terrible as an actor in these Star Wars movies. Again, I don't know if it's the lines. It's not quite as bad in Attack of the Revenge of the Sith is where it's like, "The oppression of the Sith will never return." I'm just like, what are you doing? But this one is kind of just like, like if they do break away, there aren't enough Jedi to protect. It's like everyone was instructed, like, pretend as if this was your 7th grade play and use that as your motivation,
sound as cold and calm as possible.
Mace Windu is a character I really struggle with, because I think that he is such a badass, but he's also such a dick. I think he's like almost the worst villain in all of these. I posted a meme the other day that I thought was so funny, because it was like, in Revenge of the Sith, Anakin's got his crossblades. He's about to cut off Dooku's head, and he's like, "I shouldn't. It's not the Jedi way." He has to be coaxed into doing it. Mace Windu is just like, "Oh, is that your dad over here? Let me go chop his head off because I'm a Jedi." Like, he has no reservations. And then he has the balls to look at Anakin and be like, "I don't trust you,"
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. I mean, yeah, I guess you're right. He wasn't. I mean, there were a few lines that I really liked in it. I guess mostly because I just like how cool he looked, and I like that he had a purple lightsaber. I mean, there's those little small stupid things I liked, but you're right. A lot of the lines he delivered were definitely not great. They're pretty flat.
They're flat. And again, like, I think, it's almost more of a testament to Ewan McGregor and Natalie Portman, who you could tell Natalie Portman is working overtime to try to put any emotion
She is
into
working
this.
so hard.
She like put in the work. I could see why she's like tired of Star Wars by the end of it.
She also had to have read that script and gone, okay, so let me get this straight. After he tells me he killed all the children and women, I marry him? That's when I decide to marry him?
And then she's like really shocked and disgusted when he does it in the next movie. It's like, well, I don't know. I've listened to enough Serial and watched enough true crime docs that I would kind of know that he has a pattern of killing children by the time that we get to Revenge of the Sith. That's kind of on you, Padme,
Yeah. You married the guy who right before you got married was like, hey, remember I killed my mom, but I decided to kill their kids too.
I guess that's the other thing. And it's like, I get it. I get that we're just like on such a crunch thing, but it's like, are you really trying to tell me that Padme is so impulsive that by the end of this movie, they got married? Like, that's insane to me. I get it. Like, time has to, by the time we see her at the beginning of the next one, she already has to be pregnant. I don't know. I just feel like being married is like at the end of this movie is insanity. Like, I would almost rather they tell me that it happened off screen at the beginning of the next one. So it doesn't just feel like Padme is just like I get it. She's supposed to be infatuated and super in love. And maybe that's part of like why she's so blinded, but it's like, there's no real good reason within the runtime of this film that she does such a 180.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. So I guess that's the big part that bothered me so much. And especially once you see Revenge of the Sith and know that the thing that really pushes him to the dark side is his worry at losing Padme, you're like, okay, but like that love has to make sense then. Like, he went on one adventure and decided he loved her and he's been obsessed with her for the past 10 years. The problem is that guy has just been messed up from birth, if that's the case. And then I don't feel sorry for Anakin. I'm supposed to like enjoy his redemption in some way, and I don't.
I think you hit it earlier where it's like, imagine, I think the fatal flaw of this love story, and I almost would accept it so much easier, is if it hadn't been 10-year gap between the last time they saw each other. If they had stayed in contact this entire time, and so that when we meet them, we're not starting basically from the very beginning again. It's almost as if everything in Phantom Menace didn't count at that point.
Yeah.
Then it would be so much easier to buy,
Yeah, if he'd been like the envoy to the Jedis the whole time and been hanging out with her the entire time between that point or whatever, she'd been checking in on him as he's becoming a Jedi and getting trained or whatever, and they'd been hanging out, like all that would make way more sense then. Yeah, you're right.
Plus too, imagine the beginning of the movie is exactly the same. Someone's trying to kill her. Palpatine's like, you should have a Jedi. And imagine if Anakin was like, she's my best friend, put me on this case.
Yeah.
So now you really have Obi-Wan being like, hey, how close are you guys getting? Because I'm getting a feeling like maybe you're heading down a path you shouldn't be, like I feel like that would have been a stronger. I don't know why this movie felt the need to flip-flop back and forth between like, I get where he was going with it. It's like Padme is giving up a little bit of herself into falling in love, but I feel like you could have achieved that without her, having to reject him like 5 times. Because then he just seems like, dude, no means no. Like, just
like a frat boy who keeps bringing you beers or something. You're like, come on, dude. I said no the first time. I don't want any more beers. You're not going to get me drunk to do me, bro. It's not happening.
I guess that's, you know, it's weird for me to say that I love so much about this movie except the love story, when the love story is really the crux of the whole movie. I acknowledge that that's a weird thing to say, but, you know, I think I've also made the point that there's so much good Star Wars stuff otherwise in this. And really, you know, another kind of like fun little like, oh yeah, I guess that is true. Like, for all the people that truly hated Jar Jar in the first movie, look, now you can pin the entire empire right there on Jar Jar in this movie.
Doesn't that feel great? You can blame the Palpatine coming to power and the Nazis winning on Jar Jar.
But also too, like, that's such like a Palpatine move, which is like, you know, a lot of times it's a very easy, like a childish, not childish, that's the wrong word. It's a very digestible for like younger audiences reason for like, how do things like this happen? And it's like, well, people who are conniving and who are corrupt and who are evil prey upon people who maybe aren't quite as intelligent or who they perceive as weak, and they coerce them into doing these things that give them more power. So like, I kind of feel like it had to have been Jar Jar, and it's not because Jar Jar is an idiot. He doesn't prey upon Jar Jar's lack of intelligence. He preys on Jar Jar's good-hearted nature to want to help people.
Exactly. And that's, again, that's what evil people do. They play on your empathy, and they're like, look, if you do this, you'll be able to help people. And then you're like, oh, really? I'm going to be able to save people's lives? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this was Jar Jar's big moment to him. And I love in one of the Aftermath novels, I've talked about this a lot, there's like a little short interlude. It's just a couple pages. And it's basically Jar Jar is a street clown now. He's kind of like this homeless, like, street performer, and only kids like him. Everyone hates him because they know it's his fault that the Empire rose to power. And it's the saddest story. And, you know, there's this little kid who's a burn victim from this horrible war, this horrible fight, is the only person that loves him because everyone's afraid of that kid. And Jar Jar is just, you know, welcomes them with open arms. He's like, everyone hates me because, you know, what I did. So I always felt bad for Jar Jar. This movie definitely cements him as the reason why all of this essentially happens. But there's a plot hole around here that I discovered that I really never thought about until I watched it this time around. And I want to get your thoughts on this. So we know that the clones were made on Kamino. They were ordered by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, who was killed by his former best friend, Count Dooku. Yeah. And so when Obi-Wan arrives to this planet that's been erased from the maps and finds this army, he reports back like, hey, did you guys order an army? Did you tell Sifo Dyas to order an army? Because there's an army here, and that's super suspect. But we find out at the beginning of this movie that there is some sort of proposition that's going to be voted on about the creation of an army. So my question is Palpatine trying to play stupid when he says, for my first act, I'm going to create a grand army? Because if I'm a senator, the first thing I think is, great, how long is this going to take? And if they're like, oh, it's done already, I'm going to be like, that's weird. What were you going to do with them if we had voted no? Likewise, on the other side of that, either, so that's scenario one, is they have to explain how they had to basically the whole Republic how they had this army ready, or two, the bill that was going to be voted on was not about creating the army but deploying the army. In which case, how dumb are the Jedi if everyone else knew that these clones were already made and they're just like, oh, it was erased from our maps, we didn't know. So it's just, that's a little bit of a plot hole where it's just like when Palpatine finally says like, I'm creating an army, no one really questions how an army of clones is already built and ready to go. And Palpatine doesn't play stupid either. He's just like, I guess it exists, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that as well last night, literally going like, why, how come no one's questioning why there's a clone army and they're just like putting them to work? I would immediately be like, well, no Jedi ordered this. I know a Jedi didn't order this. Like, this seems not likely. What's going on? And that would be my first order of business. I wouldn't be like, oh, well, hey, you want to come work for us? Like, I wouldn't, I don't know. That whole thing alone is definitely a point where you're like, why? I just think about, like, these guys are supposed to have the Force, even if it is a little bit clouded in the dark side. You'd think they would have a little danger sense about the whole thing.
You don't even need the Force to me to know, like, hey, if someone created this army in secret, there's got to be a catch. I'm not trusting my life to a bunch of soldiers that were made as part of someone's lie, you know?
And also, wasn't Jango Fett, like, part of the Separatists?
He's kind of like a unaffiliated, really. I don't think they know. By the time Obi-Wan gets to Kamino and Jango's there, I think it takes him half a second to realize, like, oh, this is the guy who's just been trying to. I don't think he has an affiliation. I think he's just in it for himself.
But he'd been trying. Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. So he could have just been a hired assassin or whatever.
Right. He says that Lord Tyrannus, which, by the way, it's just like, I was hired by a man named Tyrannus. It's just like, we only hear Count Dooku called Tyrannus once in the whole movie, which is at the very end where he's like, welcome home, Lord Tyrannus. But so easy to miss. I just feel like there's a lot of those things where it's just like, unless you are super into the lore, this movie could get really confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, like, I still would think, like, it's weird that he got hired by someone who, and then he goes back to him. But he was created from, the army was created from him. So you don't think there's any connection with any of that stuff?
I mean, it's like Obi-Wan's pretty much tells them, like, hey, they use this bounty hunter Jango Fett, and I think Jango Fett is the one that's trying to kill Padme. So it is kind of weird that the Jedi are like, okay, well, maybe he's bad, but his army should be fine. It's like, all of this is very strange, and I don't know. I honestly don't know. I need to, like, go back. It's at my parents' house. I need to get my Attack of the Clones novel, because something tells me that in the novel, maybe this question is actually answered, but it should have been answered in the film. If it's literally as simple as Palpatine saying, hey, the Jedi just told me that this army was created, let's vote on whether or not to use them, I'd be like, no.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I vote no. That's weird. So, again, it's just part of the rush storytelling, which, I'm fully on board with you. I think this movie has some of the best Star Wars to ever Star War. But as a film itself, it's really hard to justify a lot of the choices that were made.
Okay, now this is going to sound like a weird comparison, but right after I watched Attack of the Clones yesterday, I watched Solo.
Okay.
And I'm not saying there aren't problems with Solo. There are tons of problems with Solo. But it's also a really fun movie. And I gotta say, that part of Attack of the Clones, if you can remember to get rid of some of the, like, cheesier moments or whatever, is that it's fun. It is a fun Star Wars movie. And yeah, there's some cool plot points, or the mystery and the political intrigue stuff is semi-interesting. But, like, the real part of it is that there's great battles. The flights, the space dogfight, I guess we call it, that's magnificent. The ground fight scenes are all amazing. The 101 battles are incredible. The Yoda fight scene was literally got me out of my seat yelling, and so those things, in a way, make it similar to Solo for me, because there's so many great moments in Solo that I really love, that I like him shooting him when he's in the middle of his speech on Solo. That's dope. That's perfect Star Wars. That scene in the cantina with the cards, with the playing sabacc, that's dope. That's Star Wars. Like, there's these things in it, and I think that's the same with Attack of the Clones. There's these things in it that were so deeply Star Wars, so many different scenes where you felt like you're on this different planet, but it's also something you recognize. Like, like the scenes that even though they were the cheesy part of the love scenes that were written terribly, those scenes where they're sitting in that grass field with like waterfalls, that's beautiful. Like there's all these little parts of both of these movies that I think make them a comparison in a way. I mean, I still think Solo is probably better overall, but there's definitely holes in that and the plot and a bazillion things in Solo that I could see annoy people. But like, it's overall one of the funner movies I went to, and I remember seeing Attack of the Clones in the movie theater, and I had a good time. And let me tell you, that's better than Spider-Man 1. When I saw Spider-Man 1 with Tobey Maguire, I left that movie angry. I did not like that movie at all. I liked 2 a lot better. But so in the moment, if I think about in the moment of having seen that movie, I really enjoyed it overall when I left the theater. I have to say that's true. Don't get me wrong. It's still my most disliked Star Wars movie, but it's still a Star Wars movie.
Yeah, it definitely ranks lower for me. I think I have this towards the bottom of my list. I love Solo, and I think Solo, I think that's actually a very apt comparison, where I think, especially for Attack of the Clone, a lot of the parts are greater than the sum. There's definitely things I wish I could change about Attack of the Clones that maybe would make it flow and fit a little bit better. But ultimately, I think for me, it's like the stuff that I love in Attack of the Clones, even if it's a little few and far between, I love so much that I just, it does pain me when people are like, nah, skip that one and just go straight to like, just start at 3, or, you know what I mean? I'm like, no, there's stuff in here. Like,
it's necessary.
Yeah. The Jedi getting killed in Revenge of the Sith doesn't work until you see the dynamic of the Jedi, and especially the clones in this movie. As much as Anakin is all over the map in this one, he still has some good moments. Like I said, confessing that he killed them is a great moment. Explaining to Padme what the Jedi, how they feel about love and compassion. That's an important moment.
Honestly, another important moment is when he actually explains that he thinks people should just be made to make the decision. They try to make a joke out of it, but he actually believes that.
Oh, 100%. And it's so funny because it's like Anakin is this kind of, I love how she's just kind of like, yeah, that's exactly what we do. What do you think we do? And that's where he's just like, well, then someone should just make them do it. And I 100% with you. It's kind of like when someone makes like a joke expecting you to laugh, and you're just kind of like, I can't tell if you're serious or not. You know what I mean?
You mean that.
Yeah, you totally mean that, dude. And that's what you're going to do. That's what you're going to end up doing. And I do love to, it can't be overstated that I think, one thing that we didn't talk about, and Ken Knapsack and we talk about this all the time, one of my favorite scenes in all of any Star Wars is the conversation between Obi-Wan and Count Dooku. I think that is not only just brilliantly acted by the two of them, but it's such a crazy character moment. And it's truly like, to this day, when I watch it, I don't know if sometimes I believe that Dooku's deceiving him. Sometimes I believe he actually, it's like, I don't care about Jedi. I don't care about Sith. I am my own thing. And it really reveals a lot about Qui-Gon in that moment too, because a lot of what Dooku says is the same stuff that Qui-Gon was kind of preaching in the first one, but now hearing it come out of this guy's mouth, it's all very interesting, and it's so well played. And I just think like that scene is a reshoot, by the way. One of my favorite scenes of Star Wars was not even in the original shooting.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think it was a necessary part too. Plus it was funny.
I mean, it's great. It's it also kind of plants this idea of like, it's a line that shows up in Revenge of the Sith where Padme's like, what if we've been on the wrong side of this war the whole time? And it's so brazen of Dooku. That's why, like, I never know if it's like, is this just arrogance or is this like a really deceitful to just be like, hey, this is what's happening. This is our plot. This is what we're doing. My boss, the bad guys, we're actually in charge of the Senate. Like, we are in charge of all this. So you and I can stop this. And it's just like, imagine if Obi-Wan hadn't brushed that off, you know?
Yeah. What if he'd gone to work with him?
Or what if he had actually just kind of been like, you know, I always think like, why didn't Obi-Wan go back to Yoda and the council and just be like, you know, we need to, whoever the Sith Lord is, I feel like they are in our midst right now, because they don't come to that conclusion until it's too late.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it's like, it's also interesting because people don't like the Last Jedi a lot, obviously. And one of the best lines in there is when Luke is like, at their height, the Jedi Order was brought down by 2 Sith Lords. Like, that's really one.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so like he's got a point. Like, the arrogance and the ego has definitely got in the way of them ever thinking that they could be beaten, I guess.
I mean, that's why Last Jedi is great too, because Luke finally says the one thing that I've been saying for years, which is just like, you know, the Force doesn't care about Jedis or Sith. To think that it dies if one of them goes is just arrogance. You know,
Yep.
The Force is just the Force. And definitely one other thing I noticed this time is, again, like, why would you bury this? There's the scene at the beginning of the movie where they're kind of standing watch while Padme's asleep and the assassin comes in, and Obi-Wan kind of talks about how the Jedi feel about Palpatine and how he personally feels about Palpatine. He's like, look, I know he's your friend, but I've noticed that he is really good at stirring people up. But the problem with that is, while that dialogue's happening, you're actually in the other room, and that dialogue, I have surround sound, is just in the rear speakers as if you are listening to them talking in the other room. I'm like, no, that's important dialogue. Don't shift it to the back, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that scene right there, and just that he does trust politicians in general, and like doesn't question their motives is suspect. Because look, we know where I lean in the world of politicians, but and I don't believe the all politicians are blah blah blah. But politicians have to be a little bit like they've got to like work within a world, and there's only so much goodness they can do, you know, and get away with what they have to deal with people who are bad sometimes, and they have to manipulate people to get things that they want. Like, that's part of their job, is manipulating a group of people to believe in what they want them to believe, whether it's the right or the wrong thing. So, you know.
Yeah, look, I think this movie, there's a lot to talk about when you really think about it. For being the one that's just like, ugh, that's the worst. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot happening in it. But
isn't that one of its problems? I mean, if you think about it, what is New Hope about?
I mean, New Hope is just kind of like it's like Luke taking his first step into this bigger world, and the farm boy becoming the hero, you know?
Yeah, that's what that story is about. And it's about the rebels fighting an oppressive government. Those are the two things it's about, and that's basically it. Empire is just a continuation, and Return of the Jedi is the winning against that oppressive government, and Luke coming into his full realization. And I guess a little bit of redemption for Darth Vader, sort of, but not really. So, you know, it's like they're simple plots in overall. And you could argue like, oh yeah, well, it's more complicated in these ones. But I think that making it that complicated made it so that it couldn't be as good as it could be, I guess.
I mean, even so, with all the plot threads that it has, like, it doesn't pay enough service to any of them. I feel like the fact that there are separatists, that there are people leaving this republic, that should have been a bigger deal than just one conversation at the beginning of the movie where, literally Palpatine and Windu are just going back and forth, basically just doing exposition. If they leave, we can't control. It's like, well, I would love to hear, like, why do you want to keep them? What are they threatening by leaving? Is it like, and I think that's stuff that even when we get to Revenge of the Sith, they want to talk about and Padme starts to talk about, but we just don't have time to get into it. But we need the time to get into it,
Yeah, you can't talk about that Solace has all of the good water for Coruscant, who no longer has water on their planet because it's a city planet, for instance. And if they leave, then you don't have water because you have to form some weird alliance with them, and it's going to cost more, and nobody's going to be able to, or whatever, which is super complicated, but it's also like, if you're going to have to throw that into the plot, you have to have a reason why it's bad that they're all leaving.
I mean, I would even love just that one sentence that you just said. Like, imagine if, like Ki-Adi-Mundi had been like, we can't lose Sullust. How would we get water? It's the only planet with viable water. We must keep the Republic intact. One line, and it's just like, okay, now I get why this is a big deal. But as it stands, it's almost just like, all right, if they want to leave, just let them leave. Yeah,
like
the galaxy's big enough. That's kind of a thing with Star Wars, just in general, though. There's so much within the comics, within the books, within this and within that it's like, I love to live in this world, and I feel like I fill in a lot of the blanks, but I also appreciate the fact that a movie should be a movie and it should fill in its own blanks in order for the movie to make sense. And I will concede that Attack of the Clones is not the best example of that. I think my whole point, just to put a point on all of this and to kind of start wrapping it up here, I do think that this is a movie with a ton of flaws, but I do think that the good in this movie is still great, and it's still worth its weight. There's still, the good outweighs the bad for me.
Cool. I appreciate that. I don't 100% agree, but I do it. I 75% agree. How about that? Yeah,
I'll take it.
overall, I and you guys, I don't know if we're supposed to plug things, but me and my girlfriend are doing a show called Positive Spin, similar to this kind of. The idea is that we would be watching movies that people keep saying are bad, but instead of thinking about the parts that are bad, we go in literally watching for the parts that are good. The idea being that, like, we know this. When people work on movies, TV shows, even something as simple as this, there's so much work and passion put into it that even when it's not a thing that's perfect or great, you got to appreciate what's good in it, because so many people work hard to bring us those, to bring us their version of art, I guess. So that's the idea. And I think this is true of this specific movie as well. It has some really good moments, and it looks great. Let me say that. It is beautiful. Like, it looks amazing. And even for CG that is like out of date, it still holds up pretty well.
Ron, this is why you are the man of the people. This is why you are the heart and soul of Reboot It, which is strong in its third season now. We got a lot of cool stuff. So after you listen to this episode, check out the Reboot It channel. Ron, myself, producer Bill, Ed Greer, we are all there. And I want to thank you, Ron, but your job is not done. This is season 4. This is the final season. We're going to have to get to Revenge of the Sith before we wrap all of this up.
Okay. I actually like Revenge of the Sith overall.
All right.
I mean, the more I've watched it, because I rewatch these every year at least to try to remind myself if I like or dislike them, kind of. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's kind of what I like. Maybe I'll like Attack of the Clones more this time, and I never do. But Revenge of the Sith has grown on me a little bit more, so it'll be fun to talk about that. That's
still coming up on season 4. A lot of things still coming up on season 4. I know I say a lot, like I'm working on a lot of big stuff, but I truly mean like I have put out some feelers for some really killer episodes, so we can go out in style. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining me. Reboot It Season 3 now happening on YouTube. A new episode of Hot Takes with Billy Biz every week. It is election day as we're recording this. Everyone stay safe, stay sane, and either way, we're going to get through this, and hopefully this gave you at least an hour of, if you had to talk politics, let's make it space politics. Space politics. Thank you so much, guys, for listening, and I will see you guys one way or another next week.